Hello and welcome everyone to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host Liam, aka Himbar, and today I am chatting with someone again. If you've watched the previous chatting with episodes, this time I'm chatting with Tim. He's over here on my screen. Renfail, T.W. Anderson, the dwarf princess, whatever you want to call him.
That has been my recent title, Renfail, the bearded dwarven princess, in all my Rings of Power videos.
Yeah, so today we're just going to talk about kind of, if you watched the previous ones, we just kind of talk about just books and pop culture and just stuff in general. But Tim is an author. We got an anthology up here, which I think was the first, that came out first, right? I think before Echoes of the Past. Was
That's
it?
a good question. Does it
know.
actually say?
Maybe.
I think they both say copyright 2018. I want to say that the anthology came out a month or two before the book.
I can't remember. Yeah, okay. This says December 2018. This says November 2018.
Right. So yeah, like a month before. Mine doesn't even say because I don't think I had a date in it. It just says 2018 because this is the preprint author copy.
Okay, yeah. So
and this doesn't have page numbers either.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I don't think. Yeah, none of these. Well, one of these copies.
One of them has
does,
page numbers, yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, he is. Well, right now he's one of the creators of The Weave and the Void. That is what he works on now. But he did previously do Saga of Lucimia stuff too, which is what these two. It is the same book. I just have two copies. So, yeah.
You have somebody's. I'd be willing to bet it says Emma, right? I think is what the signature said. I had to bet that might be Emma Hextall's copy because she was one of the artists who worked on the game.
Really?
That's the only Emma that I can remember signing a book for. But I could have sworn that the first 14 or 15 copies that I signed were for the team members, and then I signed copies for everybody else. But it was so long ago, I don't remember.
It looks like it says Emma. Yeah, it says number 43.
Yeah, so. It might have been a different person then. I'm not sure.
But I don't know. It might not say Emma. It's definitely an E and an A on the end.
Yeah, there might be something. Might be something else. Who knows?
Yeah. So this bad boy. Yeah, so big.
Which you ain't getting no more because we're not doing print versions, and we have not for a couple years.
Yeah, so those are out of print. Can you buy the digital version still?
Oh yeah, you can still get the digital
that
version.
Has a different cover. I actually just looked though before we talked, Tim, and there were 3 of these for sale.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised now that all this stuff has happened.
Yeah, Saga of Lucimia is no longer a game.
No longer an MMORPG, so people are selling their signed copies off and going, "What the hell? These aren't worth anything anymore." So
that's the joke because they're worth more. Anyways, depending on who you ask, I guess. Because if I remember correctly, I believe in Bloody Knuckles, I think one of these was for a canceled game, wasn't it? One of those stories.
Yeah, actually. I don't remember the name of it. It's the one where they have the exosuits, not the exosuits. Yeah, it's like exoskeleton suits that are like charged with energy from these weird portal creatures. That was for a game that I got contracted to work on when guy was living in Dubai. He was like a contractor with the military and doing something over there, and then he had money and was like, I want to make a game company, and so I got contracted for like 8 months. I think about 8 months, something like that. I just worked with him. That's all I did was just write short stories for that dude. And just, he gave me a list of things and was like, I want a short story about this. I want an outline of this. So I just did world building for the guy and short stories for like 8 months. It was a really cool, that was a cool,
that's pretty cool,
gig.
Honestly. I think
it was. Cool. I had some really cool, I'm probably getting ahead of myself here, but in my early writing career before when I was just getting going, I was freelancing all the time. I got to do some really cool projects because you're taking whatever you can get to put food on the table. Some projects were really boring and stupid, but in between theirs were like, there was this project where I had a client who, and this is like when I got started in 2008, basically as a writer was when I got started. And it was right when the English language was exploding on the internet, so to speak, like in Europe in particular. So the United States and Canada kind of had already done their thing with websites, but all of the rest of Europe was starting to get high-speed internet, and everyone wanted to fill websites with content. And so I got in which is, I started off writing science fiction and fantasy short stories, and I wasn't making very good money doing that because it's hard to sell short stories and you're only getting paid a pittance for those. And then I started getting contracts to do a website where I was getting paid $2,000-$3,000 of cash, and I was like, well, hell, I can do this and make $5,000-$6,000 a month versus making $500 a month writing short stories. Screw short stories. I'm gonna go over here and do this. So like a client who needed a website for the X-Files, which meant I got to go back and rewatch all the X-Files episodes and write episode entries, like a Wikipedia thing, on the X-Files, which is cool. I learned how to play Texas No Limit Hold'em by a French website who needed me to do a website about poker. And so I went and learned how to play poker, ended up getting a PokerStars account, ended up playing part-time for about 8 months and making about $600 a month playing online poker. And I did a Robinhood website one time years ago where I got to go in and look at all the different versions of Robinhood to fill a website with
That's pretty
information
cool.
on Robinhood, like all the different versions. There's some crazy variants out there. There was one that was like all of the history of Disney movies, where I got to write about all of the movies that Disney had ever done, including all the controversial anti-Nazi propaganda films that they did in South America during the war. Like there was some fun stuff in there. There was also a bunch of boring stuff, like write 750 300-word description texts about hotels. And so you're doing SEO articles.
Yeah, I can.
And you have to
I've done
put
SEO
keywords
for my dad before, and it's not very exciting.
No,
So.
There was the contract I did when I met Chris. I got paid $9,000, and I had to do. It was basically 6 weeks of me working like 16-hour days, where I would grind out the actual articles in my little apartment in Cancun, and then at night I would go to this cafe downtown in Cancun, and I would do my editing, and then I would send off like 30 of these hotel descriptions at night. And Chris was working at that cafe, and that's how I met her. That was like the worst contract. It was like the most boring, mind bleeding, but it paid me enough money for the whole year. So I was like, I can grind this 6 weeks out, and then I can go work on all these other projects throughout the rest of the year. So yeah, some good and bad stuff in there in terms of writing. So yeah, that spinning back around to the short story from that anthology, that was for a contract gig. Good times. Sorry, I got sidetracked.
No, it's interesting. I'm curious. Is there did any of those magazines you worked on, were those like in physical print? I
don't think so. I think they were probably all. I think they were all low budget, like indie digital things that didn't. They might have done some print on demand, but like for example, the first one I ever did, which was Flashing Swords Press, I think they only ever did digital, and I think that later on the individuals involved with that have tried to do. I lost track like maybe 10 years ago, but they tried to do other things with print on demand and stuff, and it never panned out. So I think they really only ever did digital. I don't know of any print stuff, so no, not to my knowledge.
Interesting. Okay. Huh. Because I think I remember I was trying to look when I first read through Bloody Knuckles, if I could find some older versions, even on websites, if they were just posted on websites. I was like, maybe all these websites are down or just lost in the internet somewhere.
Medallions of Lucimia is out there somewhere. Because I had to, as part of the lawsuit stuff that I went through with the Saga of Lucimia, Stormhaven Studios stuff, I had to dig all that up and prove and be like, no, I created this IP 20 years ago. This is mine, so, and I had to dig that kind of stuff up, but it's out there, but you really got to go digging.
Interesting.
I'll see if I can find the links after done with this, and see. I'll send them your way, because I don't know if you could find any PDF versions of the publication, but I know there is an online version of the story somewhere, because I remember having to pull it up a couple years back.
It's cool though. I mean, I've mentioned this with the author. Every author I've talked to, you're the third one. They're authors. At some point, this will probably stop. But they're authors that have actually influenced my own writing or whatever. Which I can't say is impressive by any means, because none of it's published. But I did actually get. I get something should be published actually at the end of this month, now that it's May, on a website for a magazine, and I actually am supposed to find out today if another of my submissions gets rejected or accepted. So we'll see when that
I haven't
happens.
sent anything in for submission in a long time, and I'm happy to. I don't know if we want to talk about that now or I can talk about it later, the self-publishing stuff. But I wouldn't worry so much about the rejection stuff, and also about getting paid, because I only got paid $15 for Medallions of Achieva. It was literally, I wrote it, sent it off the day after I wrote it, and then went off to the next project. And like a week later, I got a notice back saying, "We'd love to have this. We pay $15." And I was like, I don't care how much it is, sale,
Yeah, right.
And because it was something I wrote in like, no time. It was like 2-3
Mhm.
days. It wasn't a big deal. And it was so cool to have the first thing that I sat down to write professionally for submission. It sold, and so I didn't think twice. I was like, "Yep, done."
Yeah, I know,
And
it's
only
definitely
6
cool.
months later did I learn that short story writing sucks in terms of trying to pay the bills, unless you're already an
Yeah.
established author who's going to get paid 7 cents a word at like
Mhm.
Asimov's or Fantasy and Science Fiction Magazine or whatever, the places that are paying pro rates, which I don't even know
Right,
what pro
yeah.
rates are these days. I don't know if they've gone up or if they're still stuck at 7 cents a
I
word.
think it might be 8 cents, but I'm not 100% on that actually. It might be 7 cents.
It's still hard to make a
So,
living at that.
yeah.
If you're going to
So,
write short stories, every author I've ever talked to or known has always said, if you want to focus on short stories and that's what you want to do because you don't want to write long form fiction, you need a spouse or significant other who pays the bills, because you are not going to make enough money off of writing short stories to make a living, at least for not several years, because you're just going to be sitting there. Because to make that kind of money, I mean, if you're only getting paid 8 cents a word, and they have a limit too, because they're only willing to pay you up to like 6,000 words or something. You know what I mean? So it's like you might get,
yeah.
maybe you'll get $700, $800. Even if you get $1,000, you still need to you still need to sell like 3 to 4 short stories every month to reliably make a living as a short story author. And that's just not, I don't think that's feasible unless you're someone like Stephen King, who already has an established audience who's going to buy that stuff
Yeah.
immediately.
Right. Yeah, I can't imagine. Yeah, making a lot of money off that stuff at all. I mean, like, yeah, this one that
I,
is like kind
don't
of.
don't focus.
Yeah, definitely not. I like the idea of writing, and if someone wants to publish it, and then someone else can enjoy it, then that sounds great. I don't care if I made $5. You know what I mean? Like the $5 is
That's a good
nice, but
that's a good
obviously it's just
attitude to
$5,
have.
so that's nothing, right?
If you can keep that attitude, it
Yeah,
makes it
definitely
it makes it
not
easier to
going in
sell
here
short
for
stories and
big
deal
money.
with the small amount of pay, because it's like, well, I don't care about the pay. Someone's reading the work. That's all I care about.
Yeah, I would like to do like some, or would potentially like to do something related. Like I have. I mean, I'm at the age where I don't really have a career yet, right? And so it's just like one of my, I think would be cool to do would be like an editor for like a publisher, like, but whether it be for bigger things or just like short story collections, because I think that stuff's cool. So I love short stories. A little, I would say a little underrated these days, actually, in our day and age. But
I think they are, because everyone wants to be the
so,
next
but
Sandler.
actually, that's funny because your anthology here was. I say I like short stories, but I can thank this anthology actually, because this is the first anthology I ever read. And now I have a stack of anthologies sitting on by my bed. That I just like go through a book, go through a story in that or this one or whatever. And so it's just like, which is actually interesting because that's like at the time when I first read your writing was back in 2014. I think. I don't know if did you put the chapters up as soon as like you had started Saga of
Yes.
Lucimia?
As soon as I launched the website, because I put the website up around August of 2014, and I
Yeah.
immediately put the first 12 chapters. I think I put them up right away. I might have published them once a month, or once a week or
I
something.
I think they were staggered,
I
but
think
maybe
they were
they weren't.
staggered.
Um,
Yeah, I think it was like once a week or once every 2 weeks or something when I put
yes.
them out.
But I remember that's what got me interested because I was like, because at the time Pantheon was really big. It was kind of riding its hype train, and I was like sticking over here with Saga of Lucimia, which at the time was just you and Giovanni, I think.
It was
Right?
my brother, myself, Giovanni.
Okay, yeah. And
Um,
so
yeah, it was just like 3 or 4 of us at the beginning. Yeah.
I was just like, hey, there's a story. So I have something I can, read and get a part of the world rather than just here's a pre alpha, like thing of Pantheon that's not it's gonna go like nothing like this by the time the game comes out in a decade or whatever, right? And so it's just like that helped me a lot, introduced me to your writing, of course. But nowadays you're actually working on a different project, of course. It's the one behind you, The Weave in the Void, which is actually kind of like reading those chapters back in 2014. It's part of it at least is the serialized novel, which I'm actually not. Is it chapter 17? I think I'm almost done with chapter
Yes.
17.
Yeah,
Not
chapter
quite.
17 just came out. It's the biggest chapter so far.
Yeah.
I kind of stopped everything about this project has been an experiment.
Hmm.
One part was we're blending 3 different projects together. We have the point and click game, we have the 5th edition, which I literally went and looked, and I was so excited to see the Dragonlance news come out, even though it sucks
Uh-huh.
that Weiss and Hickman aren't involved. They're like not involved at
Hmm.
all with the
Yeah.
new Dragonlance, which does suck. But I went back to the way Hickman and his wife created Dragonlance, and I said, first there was the setting, the campaign and modules, then there were books, then there were video games. And so my brother and I took that and we went away, and originally it was just going to be the 2 of us, and
Hmm.
then Chris had been doing some artwork and I just was like, "Do you want to maybe?" And she was like, "Absolutely." So then Chris got involved. So but it started off as a setting, so it's a 5th edition, and originally it wasn't going to be a 5th edition. I have my own homebrew version of
Hmm.
2nd edition AD&D that I've used for years, but the legal complications with trying to publish anything in the tabletop world where Wizards of the Coast is the big dog and they have everything locked down related to the D20 system and anything like that. Like
Yeah.
you can't
Which
mention
is silly,
magic
but
missile and all this other stuff because it's part of the was way easier to just adapt our setting to the 5th edition OGL open game license and just
yeah.
make it a 5th edition setting. So, but it was always going to be a setting first with a point and click game associated with it. And then only after we had started that process did my brother and I go, oh, you know what? We might as well have a book series attached to this because because everything we did and all those brainstorming episodes are public, by the way. For anybody who wants to watch those, they're on my personal YouTube channel, youtube.com/Renfail, when the project was called Project Drummond. It was before we had a name for it. We did like 115 episodes on of videos and Patreon posts and stuff. But when we were doing those, we were talking about how we wanted to do this project through Patreon as opposed to the way we did it with Saga of Lucimia and Stormhaven Studios, which was selling pre-orders and raising money from investors and so on and so forth. So knowing that we wanted to do it through Patreon, we said, well, how do we need something to regularly publish on the Patreon page. So how do we get regular content above and beyond developer updates? And then we went, well, we could do the book series through Patreon and have it just be serialized chapters. And that's how that sort of got thrown into the mix because the book didn't actually come until later. But then once we had everything ironed out, that has been the most visible component of the
Hmm.
product because it's at the base tier. Like everybody can get in for $3 a month and read those book chapters. And the first 3 chapters are free. I've got them out as a prologue that you can download in a PDF with all of Chris's artwork and stuff. So that's been the most accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot going on with that project above and beyond uh, the book because in between writing the book chapters, I do all the 5th edition stuff. But the whole thing has been an experiment because when I did this, I went in and said, first of all, I want to do this in the style of Dragonlance. So I want to write this in third person omniscient, which is way different than third person limited from a POV standpoint, because you have to be
Hmm.
very careful. Because if you're not careful, you can do too much jumping around in the characters' minds, and then the reader gets confused. Which this is one of the reasons I have a hard time reading Salvatore sometimes, because he's
Yes.
it happens a little too much with him. Whereas I think Weiss and Hickman did a much better job because there was 2 people, so they were able to criticize each other and critique each other as they were going along in that process. So that was an experiment for me because I'd never done that before. And second of all was saying, okay, I want to take a note away from Kevin J. Anderson and Tom Clancy and some of these New York Times bestselling authors who talk about how try to keep your chapters short
Yeah.
because the modern reader isn't going to sit down and read a 15,000 word chapter like they used to because now they have the internet and they have cell phones, they have social media, and they're getting interrupted. So you have to write short chapters that are like 2 to 3,000 words. So then I went, okay, well let's if we're doing these as Patreon posts, let's keep those chapters around 2,000 words, maybe 2,500 max. But once I got deep enough into the story and I got through part one and I got into part two, I just threw that out the window and said, you know what? I'm just going to let the chapters, I'm shooting for 2,000 is the minimum, but there is no hard cap now on where I end up. So chapter 17 ended up being 3,700 words, which is a lot bigger than some of the previous chapters, but it's not nearly as big as what I did with Echoes of the Past,
Yeah.
where I had 7,000 word chapters.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
So that there's all of this has been an experiment to some degree, but I think it's been working pretty good. I know we have, and it's also the other experiment. The other part of the experiment is because these are being published in a serialized format, and they're being published in what I consider to be a rough draft format. So they only ever get, and I see it constantly. If I go back and reread a chapter like 2 months down the road, I'm like, I've used the same word 5 times within like 1,000 words. Those are the kind of things you'll want to weed out during the editing, one of the editing processes. And that's not the rewrite phase per se, but there's a line edit process where you're going to go through and you're going to say, how many times did I use the word surprised or suddenly within a
Mhm.
1,000 words? And you have to go through and either just completely edit out sections
Mhm.
or change wording around. Those are the types of things that I don't worry about in the rough draft. I just put it down on paper. So
Yeah.
people are reading these in a rough draft format later on when all the chapters are done and I combine them together into the book format. That will happen. I will probably rewrite some things, add some stuff, cut some stuff, and theoretically, I might get an editor this time around because I never had an editor with Echoes of the Past, and I went back and reread it about a year ago, and I found so many mistakes where I was like, "Oh, that's not good." Like grammar mistake, like because I
Yeah.
used voice to text for a lot of stuff, so some of the spellings, like there
Mhm.
versus there, that kind of stuff.
Right, yeah.
Um, those little things are in there, and if people are willing to ignore those, then it's a fun read. But
Yeah.
if you're a nitpicker who likes to who sees those things and goes, "I can't read this anymore because he had a misspelled word," it does take away from the enjoyment a little bit for some people. So we'll see how things go. But so far, it's been a fun experiment with this new project, and we'll see how things pan out long term with when we get editors and refinement and everything else.
Yeah, I will say honestly, I mean, I know it's your rough draft form, but I still think it's really enjoyable. So,
Thank you.
and I know some others have been enjoying it as well. So,
Yeah,
I
Sparrow
will,
Sparrow
yeah,
binge read. Like I didn't realize
yeah.
this. Like she had been waiting and then she got involved and she like read the first she subscribed and then like within the first I think within 2 days she had read all the chapters that were available and she's like, "When's the next one?" And it's like next week.
Yeah.
Damn it. Like, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I know, right? That's encouraging. Um, but how would I say this? So you played a lot of second edition than AD&D.
Yes.
Um, let's see. How'd you get into that? I'm trying to think how old you are. Trying to,
Um
and then thinking
so
what.
I originally was introduced to D&D through video games
Oh, okay.
in the mid 90s. So I was playing point and click games, King's Quest, Quest for Glory, Space Quest
Hmm.
series, stuff from LucasArts like Full Throttle, Zach McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders. Lots of good point and click games. And somewhere in there in the mid 90s, they had D&D started doing they'd already been doing games I think from the 90s, but we started to get like the
Yeah.
Ravenloft series, and we had some
Okay.
Dragonlance games, and there was like Pools of Radiance and some other stuff.
Pulse of
And
Radiance.
so I had
How about
started to get into those because I was into computer games. However, my parents were very much against D&D, and so we ended up having a I got the short version is that I got my parents tell a different story. The
that?
short version is that I was barely wasn't even 16 yet, and I got kicked out of my house because I was told that I was bringing Satan into the house because of Dungeons and Dragons. Because
Nice.
my mom found a D&D box of one of my computer games, and so just what the place where I went to live. First, initially, I ended up at my grandparents' house, and as soon as I turned 16, they immediately said, "We don't need a teenager in our house. You need to go find somewhere to live." So I ended up on my own, paying rent and everything else at 16 years of age. And the guy I happened to live with, who had a couple of rooms for rent in his apartment where I could stay for like $250 a month, which even back in the mid 90s was, late 90s was, it's not one cheap, but it wasn't I could actually afford $250 a month in rent.
Yeah.
He was an older guy and he liked D&D and Magic the Gathering. And that was when Magic was first coming out and everything else. So as a result of that, I got into Dungeons and Dragons because I'd already been so I knew the franchise because of the video games. And then he liked playing D&D, so it was like, and Magic, so it was just a natural progression. But he's not the guy that I consider to be my mentor. That guy I met like 2 years later, which is my friend Ted, who I met at it was in Loveland, Colorado. My buddy and I was 19. The Star Wars Festival had already happened. It was the first Star Wars Festival in Denver, Colorado, which we lived in Colorado, so we lived in Greeley, and
Okay.
we went to the Loveland Theater in full costume. I was Qui-Gon Jinn. I've shared the picture on Discord, I think, a couple of times where I was, 19 years old or whatever, and my made my costume my lightsaber, and he went as Darth Maul. And we thought we were going to be the first people there to hang out. We were going to sleep overnight in front of the movie theater. And my buddy Ted, we showed up. There was already a dude there, and he had a Toyota Tacoma with a camper shell on it. He was camped out, smoking weed, cooking brats, and he had a big ass dog with him. And it was like, who's this badass? And so that was the guy Ted we met, and I became really good friends with him. And he was the one who really took me into the potential for storytelling within Dungeons and Dragons as opposed to just playing like modules, because he had his own homebrew world that was completely fleshed out, and it was based on the Greyhawk stuff, and just it was crazy. Like we spent like 8 months where we would meet up at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon and we would play until like 10, like no sleep. We would play till like 10 o'clock the next morning. And then we'd sleep for a few hours to get up. And we just lived on like Wendy's double stack hamburgers. And it was not a healthy 8 months, but it was a fun 8 months. And that was where I really learned role playing with miniatures, painting figurines, getting into having actual miniature sets, of, like building things for your characters to play on. And that's where I really got into D&D and he was using second edition. And actually, excuse me, he was using first edition for that campaign, but I preferred second edition because after that, I got big into D&D. So then I went and bought all the first edition stuff, and then also bought all the second edition stuff, and started designing my own stuff, and found that I liked second edition more when I was designing all of the stuff for the Saga of Lucimia in 1999, 2000. And yeah, so that was what it was accessible to me then, because I don't think third edition had come out yet. Maybe it had. I don't think it
Not
had yet.
quite. No.
Yeah, it was right at the end. So second 2.5 was the most modern stuff for me at
Yeah.
the time. So I ended up buying everything that 2.5 had. So I had all the source books, including, and they're at my sister's house still in Colorado, but I've got all of it's faux leather, like this faux red leather,
The
with like gold inlay text, and it's all the
mhm.
class guides. So there's a ranger guide, a wizard guide. I got everything for 2.5. I think is what that is, or maybe I think it's 2.5.
Yeah, most people would call it that, I think.
Yeah, but
So
that's where that comes from, because I did start on first edition, but when I went and bought all my own stuff, I went to second because it had better covers and everything else. And then when I was like designing all my own stuff, I was like, well, these rules are a lot easier than the rules from first edition, so I'm going to use these. And there was way more books and
not as convoluted,
way
that's
more
for sure.
stuff, so I got way into it. Yeah.
Yeah, I have some second edition stuff. I've only played it once. Owen Edwards prefers second edition. Actually, he runs second edition games still.
Yeah, he's got
So
his Discord channel and everything set up.
yeah, so
It's a fun edition. It still uses the THACO system, which is a little hard for some people to wrap their
yeah,
mind around. But I think that it was a great evolution. I feel like fifth edition is amazing. Like I love fifth edition. Like a lot of people hate
uh-huh.
fifth edition. I love it. I think it's a natural evolution of the system, and I think it's done great things for the brand. Obviously, it's become this billion-dollar franchise now because of fifth edition.
Hmm.
But 2.5, I think, was where they actually first they took all the great ideas from first edition and said, let's make it more accessible and bigger and easier to play, and we're going to add all these class guides, and we're going to add all this additional lore and everything. But it was also before they had settled on a setting. So I don't remember second
Definitely.
edition being a setting per se. As with fifth edition, it's definitely set in Faerun. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's
Yeah.
Forgotten Realms. Like
Yeah.
back then, it was just a
They had a
rule
lot
set.
more in second edition. They had more settings in second edition than they did in first edition. Third edition is probably about the same. But so, which is pretty interesting. I'm actually in the middle on fifth edition myself. That's my first experience tabletop was Edge of the Empire, Star Wars, actually. And we also did well. We didn't stay up that late. We weren't. No weed was involved, but we were. We just like start late and then go way early in the morning. Or not way like late into the morning, kind of, with like a 24 pack of Mountain Dew or something. Um, so when I was like 15, I think is when I first played that. But fifth edition was my first version of D&D, and I actually my preference is Castles and Crusades. It's kind of like an in between like AD&D and the kind of the superhero feel of fifth edition, which is like the only one thing I don't like about fifth edition is it's really hard to die when you get to a higher level. Um,
So
so
this is why, yes, as much as I love fifth edition, I can give the same critique. Is that they've made it so easy
mhm.
that it's very difficult to feel challenged, which is why you have to. So we just ran the Lost Mine of Phandelver campaign for a few months, and I
Yeah.
complained constantly because just by using their natural progression system, Bounty Code's sorcerer became so OP by like third level that I was having to make shit up for the encounters because he was just laying waste to everything, and it was like, no, these encounters are supposed to be difficult, and you've turned them into cakewalk because you've used the exact system. Like he didn't do anything wrong. He literally
Uh-huh.
used the sorcerer system and the point system and everything else. But because of the way he did things, it just made everything trivial. And that was no, it's no fun when it's trivial. Like there has to be challenge to it. There has to be death.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's one thing you might Castle Crusades is really easy to run. I know you're planning on doing your fifth edition thing. That's cool. It's definitely the popular thing to do. When I do run fifth edition, I definitely modify it now to make it a little harder. The one thing I like that's just simple from Castle Crusades is at -10 you're dead. You don't have to go negative all your health because that helps people stay alive really, like way longer than they should be alive. But
I think, at least in the way I've designed it so far, for those people who are going to purchase the source book, we've got the first module is in the source book. So those books are out, by the
mhm.
way. Plug. June 1st, 2022, those books are out. Find more information at
Just a
patreon.com
month.
forward slash wandering hermits. Wink, wink. Um, but the way that that's all been designed is I actually there's a section that explains to people that there's an easy fix to that. If you start to find
Mhm.
that someone has done something that you didn't anticipate, and they've made a character that's a little OP for what you've got going on, just add a 1 to the front of the hit points. And now instead of having 70 hit points, they have 170 hit points. And then you can just add like a +5 to all their rolls, and now you have a boss fight. That's an easy solution to tweak. And you can also just make shit up and be like, he cast a fireball, and then you've got a rule person in the back who's like, wait a second, that kind of mob can't cast a fireball. And then it's like, I'm the DM. It can do whatever I want it to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have to. I say fifth. Here's why we chose fifth edition. It's easy to sell, and it was the easiest legal solution. Even though it might
Mhm.
not be the best rule set out there, if you're trying to commercialize your product, you have to do
Yeah.
whatever is going to make the most amount of money. So from a logistical standpoint, it was easiest to go with fifth edition because everyone knows it, and it's easy to use the OGL. Even though yes, fifth edition is a little oversimplified in some aspects. Um, that's also made it accessible, and also
Yeah.
one of the reasons why it's become this worldwide franchise now, where you don't not just Critical Role, but you have lots of shows on the internet. You have DM Dave on Patreon. You have the Dungeon, what are the Dungeon dudes on
There's a
YouTube. Like,
ton.
there's a lot of people out there.
Yeah, it's become kind of a cool thing actually over the last few years, which is
Yeah.
definitely an interesting development, I would say. Uh, which generally, even with something like Stranger Things, all the main characters there playing D&D.
Oh, I just did a video on that recently because Vecna, like
Yeah.
the Lich is literally he's the bad guy in the new season coming out. Like they literally took the Lich, and I'm like, I can't wait to see how they play that into the show. Like, is it going to be the actual Vecna from the book? Because the Vecna from the book can travel between dimensions, and he lives in the outer
Mhm.
dimensions, and he goes between these dimensional planes of evil. Or is it
Yeah.
Vecna because the kids play D&D, and so they naturally imagine this bad guy as Vecna, and therefore they create Vecna out of their imaginations? Like, I'm really interested to see what version of
Yeah,
Vecna we're gonna be playing with.
it'll
Um,
definitely be interesting. I never actually finished the third season, but I'm squeamish when it comes to like horror and like
I noticed
you know
because you also
stuff.
said something you couldn't finish reading, Hyperion,
Yeah.
which not for horror reasons, but for other graphic reasons.
Yes.
So I've it's all good, man. Everybody's got different,
Yeah.
levels.
Which was actually interesting. Speaking of stuff like that, or maybe I'll go into that in a second. But um, Vecna is awesome, and if you don't know who Vecna is, then you're doing something wrong. Um, but and that's actually a creation of Gary Gygax, who was the guy who made AD&D. So though he passed away, I don't even know. It's been over 10 years now, I think.
It's been a while,
So,
yeah.
but yeah, but that reminded me of speaking of gore, I watched The Northman yesterday. You really need to go watch this movie. Like it's just I mean, because my thing is more of sexual content and that I don't like. I can handle gore as long as it's not like overdone. Like I'm not gonna go watch like a slasher horror film, probably ever. Or something like that. But the one thing I really liked about the movie was I know you haven't seen it, so I'll try to keep my thoughts short. But
Okay.
I think you'll enjoy it a lot. But it doesn't sexualize anything. It's really not for like it's not like pandering to a modern audience in like any way. Like it doesn't like there's it's a takes place in Northern Europe and in Eastern Europe, and so everyone's white and everyone is there. The Vikings are brutal as Vikings were brutal. Um, but and then they also do a good job with the language as well. But they don't sexualize it, which I really appreciate because there's sex and stuff in the show, but they're not like highlighting it. They're not like overdoing it. There's no sex scenes, so to speak, right? Um, and just like when there's gore, half the time they'll tone it down slightly. You know what I mean? Like when to put it this way, when people get their throats slit, they cover it with the next people in line. You know what I mean? So like, there's other stuff that's still gory, but
It's creative editing,
so,
yeah.
yes. So I mean, so it was almost too gory for me, almost, but not quite. Definitely
I
not
don't
what I would
think
normally call my
I've not found a limit,
so,
but I will say that the first show that ever made me question if I had a limit was when Stars did Spartacus. This has been 10 years ago now.
mm.
Don't watch it. I know some of your limits. It's way the first episode is just it's so beyond. I remember I watched it and I came away and said, "Did I just watch like a softcore porn set?" But it's like it had mainstream like Xena, the warrior princess, like Lucy
Oh
Lawless.
yeah,
She's like naked the whole show having sex with the slaves, and I'm like, that was not what I was ready like, I was not ready for
interesting.
that stuff, and then they're just like the violence was all CGI, but just over the t everything was over the top because they really wanted to show how over the top the Romans were, like, how
Hmm.
visceral their life was in terms of the brutality and the politics and the sex and the everything else, and it was like, okay, it was a wild ride, but that was the first show I ever watched where I went, that might have been, and then I remember when Chris, I think it was the first season of Outlander was quite, it's toned down way. It's so toned down, and like now it's in season 6 or 7, whatever. It's completely
Hmm.
now it's like a colonial. We're off in North America playing pioneers, and it's such a different show now. But that first season is there's some Have you watched it at all?
I
I don't know if you've
haven't.
seen it.
I
Okay.
haven't. But
It's really it's Outlander. So Ron Moore, who I love his
mhm.
writing from Star Trek Next Generation, Carnival, Battlestar Galactica, of course. Like I'll watch anything Ron Moore does because he's a great storyteller. So he put together this show, and so I went and watched it because of him. But I knew that the source material was like time travel fantasy, but like
Yeah.
romance stuff. And I was like, I
Yeah.
didn't know if I was gonna like it. But then I watched it and I was like, oh my god, the costumes are amazing. Bear McCreary did the music. He also did the music for Battlestar Galactica. And it's like got all these elements that I love. And so the romance was definitely there, and that was kind of a little like, all right, this is definitely more for women than men. But then they got into the brutality of the Scottish commander who was killing off the not the Scottish commander, the English commander who was killing off all the Scots, and the things that he did to the prisoners. There are some visceral rape scenes that happen between male
Wow.
figures, and Chris was just like, if my mom knew I was watching this, and I was just like, it's pretty brutal. Like I think we might have found a
That's
limit for
interesting.
what sometimes I think shows can go too far with trying to push that shock value. But
Yeah.
going back to Dan Simmons as a writer, um, Hyperion is pretty tame compared to some of his. He's done some horror works.
Mhm.
I've read quite a bit of his stuff, not recently because he's done a lot of mystery stuff as well. But I remember he did a short story collection, and there's a story in there called I think it's called Death in Bangkok.
Hmm.
And I don't I don't want to get your video in trouble, so I'll try to keep this as tame as possible and not get graphic. But the story is literally about a soldier, if I remember correctly, who he's on leave in Bangkok, and he goes to this weird underground like bar, and instead of like lady boys and other things that you might find in Thailand and in Bangkok, he finds these weird vampire women who don't suck your blood from here, they suck it from somewhere else, and they have teeth down there. And
Okay.
it was a very difficult like and the whole story is like I'm probably making you queasy by saying this either way.
No,
But like
just
literally
I think it's
it
funny.
they kill one of his buddies, and so his revenge is he purposely goes out and gets a disease and comes back and lets them kill him so that they get the disease. And I remember reading that story from him going, I don't ever want to read Dan Simmons ever again. Like I loved Hyperion, and I loved the he did this Iliad series, which was
Yeah.
2 books, which is so good, but also has a lot of sex in it. Like
Mhm.
that's just something he does. I'm not a big fan of those sequences because it is over the top. But unfortunately, that's what he does. That's part of his thing. But also, I don't know if you've ever read any why am I blanking his name? Robert Silver. He's really
Silverberg?
old. Yes.
I haven't read any yet, but I have, I
Okay.
think, one book
So
by him.
Robert Silverberg, he literally, in between paying gigs before he became he would write porn for like
Oh,
magazines. Like he would write
interesting.
short stories, like short stories.
That's
And
good to know.
right. So his work, like if you like Face in the Waters, I remember the first time I read
Mhm.
Face in the Waters. It's an amazing science fiction novel. Don't go read this. Please don't read it because it has so much graphic stuff happening in it. Not just it's same sex, it's opposite. It's just and I remember it. I tried to the first, I went and read it and was like, this is I'm not like, where's the science fiction here? Like, the only thing I can see that's science fiction here is that the book is set in a science fiction setting, but it's literally like every chapter has a sex scene. Like, I don't feel like I'm reading a science fiction novel anymore. I feel like I'm reading, but it was from that time period when that's what he was doing to pay the bills, was writing smut. And it was like, I guess everybody has to pay. I wrote website content. Other guys wrote porn, like.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Ooh, interesting. That reminds me actually, I read the first Thieves World anthology, and I remember I was looking at like some of the authors, and I was like, one of them was known for his erotica actually. I was like, okay.
I
Doesn't show
didn't
up
know
in the
that.
story.
Yeah.
But and I can't remember who it was off the top of my head. But when I think of like I'm fine with, like, I like dark stuff. I mean, it really works in some cases. I mean, like, it's you can use it for a lot of good stuff, you know what I mean? And even sexual content in some ways. Um, I'm less lenient with sexual content. It just really depends on what it is, I guess. But like I think of like Ed Greenwood, and I don't know if you've ever read any of his stuff. He's the creator of the Forgotten Realms. He's written a lot though,
I've read
and
some of the Forgotten Realms stuff, but that's about it.
yeah. So he has like he does both of these I think really well, which is probably why I really like him. Because his sexual content is just everyone's naked. At some point in a story, if you're reading Ed Greenwood, there's almost certainly a point where someone is going to be naked. Like, and it's just fine, right? If someone's naked and that's just the way the person is, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, they're not making a big deal of it, which is just weird. It's just this quirk of Ed Greenwood's that, I watched an interview of his once where he was talking about his experience growing up in this affluent neighborhood with his father, and some of the experiences there, like when a realtor was showing a house to some people, his neighbor jumped over the hedge on horseback naked. You know what I mean? So just like these weird random things that like, yeah, exactly. So, but he also does violence really well too. Like it'll be very abrupt. And then like all of a sudden this character you think is like the main character of the story is just dead. They're just like immolated on the spot or something like that. You know what I mean? Cause that's just like how he writes. And I think he does a really good job of it. Cause it's not like gruesome in detail, but it is, in that sense, at least gruesome and content kind of like,
Right.
or at least what the story is telling. So, which I think is fine. That's cool. I don't know. It's like kind of in your face. So, but I like it. I like Ed Greenwood's a funny guy. If you ever get a chance to listen to some of his interviews, you should
I don't think
go
I ever
listen to
have.
them.
I do remember reading some of his Elminster stuff way back in the day, like in the mid '90s when I was first getting into Dragonlance. But I liked Dragonlance so much more than the Forgotten Realms stuff that I naturally just gravitated to Weiss and
Yeah.
Hickman.
Yeah.
Um, there are exceptions to that because I mean, at the beginning, I remember I like some of the stuff that R.A. Salvatore has done, but he does way too much combat, and I don't.
Yes, he
It's
does.
everybody's got different. It's like I know in your Discord, there's a lot of people who don't like some of the things that Robert Jordan did with his writing, whereas I
Yeah.
love Robert Jordan. I think he gets a little overly detailed about some things, and we have all got quirks that we
Right.
can
Yeah.
pick out about our favorite authors. Um, so I'm not intimately familiar with Greenwood per se, and I think I've only read, like I said, it might have been 2 or 3 of his Elminster stuff way back in the day. I can't even remember; it's been so long ago. But I know I read them at some point when I was first trying to get into Forgotten Realms.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
He's pretty interesting. But I feel like honestly, he's pretty. People either really seem to dislike him a lot or they really seem to like him a lot, and I think that I feel like for me it helped a lot knowing like what the actual person was behind the pin. You know what I mean? Like going and watching his interviews, I was like, this guy is just he's a character. Like he's just very interesting to listen to. So yeah. So if you ever get into more Ed Greenwood, maybe go watch a little interview. I'm actually going to try to talk to him on this show at some point, but if I can get that to work.
hey, if you can swing it, man, like
Yeah. But it's interesting though because people definitely do have their quirks. It's hard to tell sometimes, but like for me, for example, I just read Gene Wolfe, and I've only read his book The New Sun, which is overly complex and confusing on purpose, and so it's hard to tell like what is part of Gene Wolfe's like just normal writing and what is like him being, like obtuse or whatever on purpose or something. And it's definitely interesting because, well, I'll have to see because I've only read his book of The New Sun, but it's so confusing, and it's just like, but I'd imagine maybe his vocabulary is similar throughout, but kind of like if ever read Lovecraft, he's kind of known for his like archaic um uh like style. Same with Tolkien even. So uh, which is I think it's funny because actually I think what's funny about that is at least the idea of an archaic writing style is that's, I would say critics would genuinely say, why would you read this as archaic? You know what I mean? Like type of thing. Like that's what like a critic would say. And they've only gotten more popular since they died. You know what I mean? Like if I think of
in
20th
some
century
cases, yeah.
authors, they're like Tolkien obviously is like the big one. He did get voted, I think, the author of the century. But Lovecraft, even though is like really big, obviously. I mean, like he spawned the cosmic horror genre, which is called the Lovecraftian horror. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So like, and he had this archaic style to him as well. And it's just like, well, I guess it works. You know? I mean, like, it's funny to me because it's like the critics they just always seem like a bunch of crybabies to me, and I think it's funny when the populace goes like against what the critics actually said. You know what I mean? I don't know. That's a different topic,
There's
but
also, there's some tropes that have stuck throughout. Like if you think about the sword and sorcery, it might not be as big as it was at a certain point in time, but we've never lost the sword and sorcery genre. Like it's always
Mhm,
been there in terms of books, comics, movies, shows.
mhm.
You're always going to see some variation. It might not necessarily be Conan the Barbarian, but we're
Right.
going to see some type of barbarian style character on screen, in film, in a book. That archetype being carried out because it is one of those tropes that goes on. The
Mhm,
Lovecraftian horror themes, um, high fantasy, I don't think has ever gone out of. It's definitely in terms of popular media, it has had you know peaks
right,
and
yeah.
valleys. But ever since Tolkien first showed the world that you could write an epic fantasy series and have it be beloved by an international audience, we've definitely seen fantasy become this mainstream thing that has never gone
Mhm,
away. And every version, every version, think about that for a minute. Every version we have elves and dwarves and halflings. Every version, like it's really hard to find a fantasy series, and if they do something, or even science fiction series, like even Star Trek, it's elves in space. It's literally elves in space, pointy ears and all. Like it's really hard to get away from that and have original races, because that's a common thing.
mhm,
Anyway, I'm off on a tangent now, but I was thinking sword and sorcery because of the way you said that, like
mhm.
Conan the Barbarian, the Tarzan theme. Like these are characters that keep getting resurrected and redone over and over. It's kind of like Batman too, which Batman is
Right,
more of
yeah.
a that's more of an IP thing than anything else because it makes money, so they got to keep that IP out there, so they got to keep
Mhm,
developing new properties. But it's also a character that is beloved by many people because it is a cool character, and the
mhm.
idea of this orphaned individual who grows up to become this crime fighting badass, and yet he's not a superhero, he's just
Yeah,
wealthy and has cool toys. It's interesting.
yeah. Right, I think there's actually a few things that made me think of there is, like, um that's, like, actually, one thing I'll say this one part quickly. The thing I like about Fafhrd and Grey Mouser is, while Conan's, like, almost a demigod, um,
Those guys are
essentially.
not.
Yeah, they're definitely not. They're freaking I mean, how to
They get
say
in
this?
trouble a
They're
lot.
dumbasses, half the
Yes.
time. I mean, just to put it that way. I mean, so, like, um, which I think is great, but also along the lines of I think you're right. Sword and Sorcery has survived in just plain old Sword and Sorcery. It's not very popular, but you could even call it a movie like The Northman Sword and Sorcery if you really wanted to. Um, but then like I look at stuff like that's kind of like influenced maybe a little bit by it. I'm maybe not this first one so much influenced by it, but kind of a similar vein in some areas, be it like macho, and that is like comics, like
Mhm.
superhero comics. I mean, a lot of Sword and Sorcery thrived as comics actually at one point or other. But it also makes you think of Dungeons and Dragons, which we already talked about. You know what I mean? But like that's an interesting mix of like Tolkien like style like races and stuff like that with Sword and Sorcery flavor. And that's basically all Dungeons and Dragons is. And I mean, if you look at the appendix in first edition, I think it's the Dungeon Master's Guide. Gygax lists
It's all the
fiction he
reading
reads.
material, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and almost all of it's sword and sorcery. But this Tolkien obviously is the big one on there as well, right? So it's just like,
Have you ever seen speaking of the North, have you ever seen it's called Pathfinder? Um, it's probably 10 years ago now, it might be more than that. But it's I'm blanking on his name. He played Éomer in the Lord of the Rings films.
oh, okay,
And he's in The Boys on Stars. He's the New Zealand actor, and I can't remember his name right now. But the theme is basically like the Vikings came over and raided North America, right? And raided the Native Americans.
yeah,
And they leave behind a baby, and the baby grows up with the Native Americans, but he's
huh.
Viking blood. And then the Vikings come back like 25 years later, and he's grown up as a Native American. And then he's having these flashbacks to when they first came and slaughtered the people, and
Huh.
but he's grown up with the natives now, and and they're attacking, and he has to revenge his Native American family. It's like the Northman
That's
type because it's
interesting.
it's the lone warrior who's out there on a killing spree in the middle of the woods, and it's all like foggy, northeastern, like Maine, like Maine, Massachusetts type stuff along the coast. It's such a good film along the vein of like The Northman, because it's Viking themed but also Native American themed. It's
That's
a
pretty
really
interesting.
good film.
I haven't heard of
Chris
that one. I don't think.
Chris and I have watched it a few times. Yeah, it's called The Pathfinder, or just Pathfinder, I think maybe.
Huh.
But it's in that vein of like it's less sorcery and more just swords, but it's
Right.
a
Yeah.
good action film.
It's like what do they call that? There's a few swords, right? There's Sword and Planet. There's Sword and Sandal, which is more like a Bronze Age, no magic thing kind of going on, and Sword and
Yeah,
Sorcery.
that's I don't know. I've read too many of those.
I have read like none, unless you count that one Fafhrd and Grey Mouser story. That's in Swords in the Mist.
Because
I don't even remember.
even all
I
the
don't remember what
Conan
it's
ones
called.
have magic in them, so it's they are definitely sword and sorcery.
Yeah, I mean that's why they call Robert E. Howard, who wrote Conan the Father, Sword and Sorcery, because of Conan. Though I think I can't even remember what it's called. Gosh dang it! It's like a Shadow Kingdom or something Shadow at least. It's what a lot of people would consider the first sword and sorcery story, and it is by Howard, but it's not Conan. It's his previous character, Cole the Conqueror.
Crow
Cole
the
of Atlantis.
Conqueror. Yeah. By the
Yeah.
way, there's a couple of variants on that. I much prefer the second version, which was he played Hercules, and I'm blanking. It's Kevin Sorbo did a Kroll the Conqueror movie in like the mid '90s. It's a super
Really?
cheesy over the top. It's Kevin Sorbo, and there's an Asian actress whose name I can't remember. She was in the Wayne's World movies. Anyway, there's a Kroll the Conqueror film. There's two of them. There's like one from the '80s, and then there's the one they did in like the late '90s or early 2000s with Kevin Sorbo. It was right when he was coming off of Hercules, and so he's still in shape and everything else. It's so cheesy, but it's a great science. It's like a great sword and sorcery film based on that character, Kroll the Conqueror.
That's interesting. I always hear about these movies from you. Like you told me about the Solomon Kane movie and the John Carter movie, and it's just like I think maybe Christopher Rocchio, who's the first author I talked to, might have at some point, not in our chat, but like on Discord or something, mentioned the Cole movie. I remember him like all caps by this axe I rule or whatever, which I think is a Cole thing. So
it might be. I don't know. I'm not that familiar with it. No, I've at some point in time, I used to just. It's less so now because I'm with Chris and we have different interests, and so I'm not as involved as I used to be in just like deep diving into stuff. But there's some really my buddy Ted, who taught me D&D, he also had a massive VHS collection. This is before, this is when CDs, but he had something like 2,000 VHS tapes.
Holy moly.
So I got to watch a ton of like really bad sword and sorcery films at his place. Also some really good stuff too, but some really bad ones that were just like, man, I can't believe somebody paid money to make that. But there's an audience for everything out there, man.
Apparently.
I also really like the new version of Conan with why am I blanking on his name now? Aquaman.
Momoa, is that his name?
Yeah, Jason Momoa. I really like his version of Conan. It's a fun movie. It's like I feel like it's just as good of a sword and sorcery film as Schwarzenegger's, like in terms of just portraying, and it's a younger version of Conan. It's done. It's very well done, I think. If you like that kind of stuff. John Carter, I love that film. Oh, I could totally watch that again.
Yeah, I was sad that I found when I think you were saying that they didn't come out with the second and third film they had planned. So big sad.
Not a good enough reception.
Yeah, which is I don't remember hearing about it at all when it was new. Like
no, it just kind of slid under the radar for various reasons. It's just unfortunate because they spent a lot of money on it, and the director was super passionate about it, and then it got railroaded into oblivion.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. That seems to happen sometimes, which is what the sad thing about that is that that's basically saying we don't want a movie like that. You know what I mean? And like I do.
Well, I think it definitely it's still made a few $100 million. I mean, it's still a lot of people went and saw it, but they wanted $1 billion film, and it only did $300 million. And they were like, well, we had to spend, it cost us $250 million to make, and then we spent another $250 million to market it. It didn't even recoup the costs for marketing.
Right. Yeah.
Therefore, we're not going
That's
to
a
make
big
another one. And
failure.
it's like, that
Actually,
sucks.
as it
It does
goes.
suck
So.
from that perspective because they lost money on that film, but it still sold like, I have to look at the box office numbers, but I want to say it. I feel like it did like $350 million in sales. Like, that's not a small film. Like, it's
Mhm.
just, you thought it was going to be a $1 billion franchise starter,
Yes.
and it wasn't. Well,
Sad.
it's the same. That's the same curse that's happened with the Kelvin franchise with the Star Trek films. The new Star Trek films was
Hmm.
that they. I did an article. I did a video on this recently. Chris Pine did an article recently, or interview recently, where he was talking about, they're obviously looks like they're coming back for a fourth one, but he talks about how I really wish that they would stop. He literally says this in the interview. He's, I wish they, meaning Paramount, would stop trying to chase the $1 billion Disney paycheck and just focus on good storytelling. Because he said, if we can do that, if we can make a story that appeals to the Star Trek fans, they're all going to come see it. Everyone's going to make money. And then if it's a good enough movie, we get other people to come in and see it. And then we start, then you can maybe
Hmm.
consider that your film is going to be even bigger. But he said, if we could stop focusing on the $1 billion Disney money and start focusing on better storytelling, we'll make more money in the long run because more people will come see those films as opposed to trying to make these blockbuster tent poles. And I was like, dude, I like what you're saying, Mr. Pine. Um,
Yeah.
because I like those films, but you can definitely feel that they were trying so hard to make $1 billion movies, and that's why they refused to make the fourth one for so long. Was because, well, they literally, I remember coming out in the press like 5 years ago or whatever, saying we can't make another Star Trek film because we're not making enough money on that. And I'm going, you're getting like 350 to $400 million every time you make one of those films. How are you not making
Right.
money on those films? And it's because they're putting so much into marketing, and then not just that, but you've got J.J. Abrams probably has a $25 million paycheck, and each one of the stars wants $20 million, and the next thing you know, you've got $200 million tied up in salaries. That's just ridiculous, but that's also Hollywood. Like, you know,
Yeah. It's kind of a shame, honestly, because I think you're right that they sometimes do try too hard. Um, when some of the stuff is just tell a good story.
it's
Like
harder.
it's
It's
just
harder than one might think.
yeah. So, but that's funny. I had to watch one of my classes I took. The guy was really into film, so I had to watch like what was I watching? I had to watch like Casablanca and like other things like that. So,
Eh, I've
but
never been big fans of like some like Gone with the Wind. I just
yeah,
don't.
I'm not a big fan of them either.
I'm like,
So,
yeah, it's. I've watched it once. I never felt compelled to watch Gone with the Wind again. It was like it wasn't that good to me. Like Men in Tights is a much better movie than
yeah,
than, than Gone with the Wind. Like, yeah, we get fart dick jokes, but it was entertaining to me, and Gone with the Wind was not entertaining. But I think for the time, and if you recognize it in that scope, it's kind of like Shakespeare as well. Like some of Shakespeare's work is classic and timeless, and those stories can be adapted into the modern generations. But some of Shakespeare's work was very much rooted in being of the times, and you're not going to be able to adapt that for a modern audience because it's going to
yeah,
lose all of its meaning. I think that's something that holds true for literature and film, more for film, um, because you'll see portrayals of race that are not like there's that I remember seeing this movie when I was a kid, and I can even remember some of the songs from this film. There's a Disney movie, which name escapes me right at the moment, but it's Song of the South, I think is what it's called.
hmm.
And it's about a black man, and but it's a racist film. It's a very racist film, and Disney put it out, and they've never showed it since because it's controversial because of the way it portrays black people as slaves, and it's got some very racial portrayals of things in it. Um, and it's a piece of film history that
Uh
Disney wishes that it could erase from history, but it
huh.
still exists. It's like
Can't.
it's you can't get rid of it. Same thing with the propaganda films that the Walt Disney himself animated and signed off on all these propaganda films in the 40s, 50s. Whenever World War II was going on. My history sucks. And those were only shown in South America, and they feature characters that have never been seen in North America. Like they're not the normal Mickey
Hmm.
Mouse, Minnie Mouse, Donald Duck. It's a completely different cast of characters that were just written as anti-German propaganda pieces during the war, and that kind of stuff is just, you can look at it, and some of it in that case is like, okay, it was a product of its times. But I was thinking more along the lines like Gone with the Wind. My brain went other places when I said that. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting though because that's actually one thing we talked about in class is that it's there and you're stuck with it, like, and it's
Oh yeah.
unmediated. If that makes sense, that's the word that my teacher would use. Like, because if you're reading something, it's a lot of it's in your head. You know what I mean? Like it's just like when Tolkien, yeah, he describes someone as swart or swarthy. You know what I mean?
I don't
But
get where
like that
people.
could mean dark skin, tan for all we know. I mean, like it's just like
Yeah, but people have
stuff.
read into that and been like,
So.
no, swarthy means he was talking about black people. And it's like, I read the word swarthy and I think there's 20 different things that swarthy could mean. You could call someone bulky or stocky. Other people might use the word fat, chubby, but
Mhm.
it depends on your interpretation of things. Um, that's a very interesting way to look at things for sure.
Yeah,
Unmitigated is the word he used.
mediated.
Oh,
I think is
unmediated. Yeah.
that like everything that because the class is about art, and so he's basically saying film is the only like unmediated art film that it's like you can't even you can interpret the themes or whatever, but like what you're seeing is what you're seeing. Even like a play is going to be performed different, the costumes are going to be different, and stuff
Mm.
like that. So
And a film is always the same every time.
yeah,
The play is a good example because every time you see a play, you're gonna get a different, even if it's the same person on a
hmm
25, night run, it's gonna be
yeah.
a slightly different performance every night because of circumstance and everything else. That's an interesting thing.
Yeah, but one thing you said that it's like I don't rewatch like almost any movies.
Oh,
I'm
I
not
do.
impressed with most that I watch, I guess. Which is funny because I guess it's similar to books. Like I don't reread most of my books. That one's more of I have a ton of books to read, and it doesn't take me 2 hours to read a book. It takes me days, right?
No, it
And
takes me
so
like, it used to take me just days. Now it takes me 2, 3 weeks.
yeah,
Um,
so
I used to reread way more than I will. I'm not willing to reread as much now because I'm older
mhm.
now, and so I have limited time compared to when I was 17 or 18. But I like rewatching films. Some of it's for enjoyment, but also
Mhm,
I use film as a storytelling tool, because I think film can teach you stripped down versions of stories
mhm.
that allow you to get a core outline in place, and then from there you can expand. Um,
Yeah.
and I think what is his name? The New Zealand director of Thor, the Thor films, Takini. What is his name?
Uh,
Watiti? I forget his name.
yeah, it's oh shoot, I'm blanking on
I'm
it too. My
blanking on it,
brother's
but
gonna kill me because he loves that guy.
I know I love him too, and I feel really stupid
Oh,
for
is
not
it
remembering his
Taika
name.
Waititi or something?
Yes, that might be it. So
Taika.
he has a
I don't
very
know.
good thing where he's talked about screenplay writing, which I think applies to any writing. And he says he'll write the draft and then he'll put it away and forget about it and come back to it a year later or whatever, reread it in one single session, then he'll throw that away and
Oh,
rewrite everything from the memory of what he just read. And he says that way I get a condensed version of that story, and that's usually the screenplay that I end up tweaking to make into a film. And I was like, that is actually really brilliant because I don't do it the same way, but I'll write something and then put it away for at least 6 months often.
mhm,
The exception be what I'm working on now, but most every other things I've worked on, if it's not for a client, if it's my own work on it, put it away for 6 months, come back to it later. That's when I'll do the rewrites, because you have time to percolate and you can forget about it, and then you come back and it's like, to some degree you're reading new stuff because you didn't remember putting that in there, or it was something that was so spur of the moment that it escaped your memory and you don't remember it until you go back, and that allows you to, I think it's easier to cut at that point. um,
okay.
I
Yeah, that
think
makes sense.
a lot of people get way too attached.
Yeah.
That is one thing I can say as a commercial writer outside of science fiction and fantasy. So the bulk of my work has been in in the travel industry, doing travel work and website content. I'd say the early part of my career, the first 3 or 4 years, was freelancing for all sorts of different stuff, and then I got heavily into the travel stuff because we were running the travel blog and doing travel photography, videography,
Yeah.
doing all that other stuff, gastronomy, and working for the tourism boards. And so you learn very quickly when you're working for other clients that you don't get paid unless you do the way that they want it to be. And so it's very easy then, once you've learned that lesson, is that don't get offended, don't get upset if somebody says that they want something taken out. Take it out. Just fucking like there's no reason to die on that cross
Mm.
if you want to get paid. Like
Yeah.
if it's your own work, that's completely different, and you are justified if it's your own work that you're trying to get sold and you have a hill that you're going to die on because no, I won't kill off that character because of reasons. That's absolutely fine as long as you're willing to accept that you might not make a sale if you're never going to change your mind on that.
Right. Yeah.
But when you're working for someone else on their scripts and their specs, it's very I got accustomed to this very early on, so I've never had a problem cutting characters, cutting chapters, cutting things out of my work, and coming back months later and just looking at something and going, "That's shit, that shit, that shit." But one thing I did learn is never just throw it in the trash. Like
Yeah.
just because it doesn't work in this doesn't mean it can't work in that. So you could take that, put it to the side, come back to it, and use it in another project.
Hmm.
Um, that's something that's always worked very well for me as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. What it makes me think of is similar but different, and editing. Basically, how do I say this? So for school, essentially,
Mm.
like when you're writing, and basically you have a teacher or a TA, whatever it might be, who wants you to write in a certain way, and it's just like, well, how do I put this? How about when I say the criticism's like opinion, if that makes sense? You know what I
Mm.
mean? Rather than like grammar issues or something like that. And they're like, okay, well, I could cut it out or take their suggestions and get a good grade. But at the same time, at least my mindset is always screw you. like, I wrote what I wanted to write. I'm not writing what you wanted me to write. Sorry. Like, that's one thing I really don't like. Is like you wanted me to write what Timmy and Tommy and Tina and Tony are writing over there, but I wanted to write what Liam wanted to write. So like I want a good grade, but at the same time, it's just like I have a hard time bringing myself to
I like
make those
paychecks, so
edits.
I've always been very good at doing what the client wants. But that's the difference
Mm-hmm.
between
Mm-hmm.
writing commercial on on someone else's dime and time as opposed to writing on spec where it's your own stuff. You can't be sensitive about cutting things. Um, I've worked with some people, and I can't say any names because of reasons, but on a project that I was working on previously to the one I'm working on now, having to deal with people who aren't you will meet individuals occasionally. They're not capable of self-editing, and
Mm-hmm.
if you try to edit them, they get upset because they think that there's no such thing as something that needs to be cut. And unfortunately, it doesn't matter if you're working with art, music, any sort of creative medium. You can always trim the fat. You can always trim fat off of something, and
Mm-hmm.
and if you're not willing to trim the fat off something, there's a really good movie which I can't remember off the top of my head now. It's um I'm gonna have to go look it up now, otherwise it's gonna drive me nuts. It's Michael Douglas, and he like wrote a book years before, and it was a bestseller, and then he becomes like a college professor, and then he's just been working on this novel for like 25 years or something, and
Mm-hmm.
he refuses to finish it, and it's like 2,000 pages long. I don't remember the name of the film now. It's a really good movie with him in it. I'm gonna look it up and tell you about it off the air. But the point of that, the thing I always love about the film is it's like that's what happens if you aren't able to self cut, self edit, or if you're not willing to let someone else look at your work and edit it for you. It can just keep going, and you end up with this bloated mess. Um, and as and you have to be willing to sometimes kill things, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's can be hard to kill off your babies, but at the same time, in that sense, you might need to cut a chapter here and there, kill off a character here and there.
Out of
Um,
context. It's hard to kill
Out
after
of
babies.
context, that might sound bad. So yeah, context
No.
is key, everybody. We're talking context is key.
Yeah, it makes me think of Wheel of Time. I liked Wheel of
Oh
Time,
man,
but even then,
yeah.
it still definitely was a little bloated.
There's like 3 or 4 books in
So
there that you could cut out
yeah,
completely.
yeah, and so that's a good example of something that probably could have used a little better editing. I don't know when he married his editor, didn't he, at some point? And
Yes. Oh yeah.
so
No, he
that
totally, because Harriet was his editor when he got hired
uh-huh.
to do the Conan novels, because she went, "Hey, I know
Oh,
this
okay, yeah.
dude. He can write really fast, and you, Mr. Tor, are wanting to make a lot of money, and you're wanting to crank out a lot of books. This guy could do that for you." And so
Mhm.
she got him that job, and then yeah, he ended up marrying her. But here's the problem with that. I think the reason why we saw the bloat in Wheel of Time was because of that. There was nepotism going on for sure, in the sense that his wife was his editor, and also from the fact that he literally was the first time that Tor had become they had a best-selling franchise that was selling millions of copies. So it was very much an open book of just saying, you know what, dude, you are the golden goose. Lay whatever eggs you're gonna lay. We're not gonna mess with your creative process, because it doesn't matter if it's full of empty crap. It's still gonna sell 10 million copies. So please write another 4 novels.
Mhm.
At that point, I think you had a combination of, you know, a loved one being an editor who's not capable of cutting things that need to be cut because they don't want to hurt your feelings, and also a publisher who's saying, "Dude, you're making all of us millions of dollars. Please continue, even if
It's
it's not
true.
the best quality content."
Very
You know,
true. It's interesting. I think, because I can't think of any other series that's been the case, but maybe I could always think of things that could have been cut. Like I think of a good chunk of Elda. You probably have never read the Aragon books, or they
I
might have.
have, but it's been long, long
Okay.
time ago, and I only read them through once.
Okay, yeah. Well, same. I might reread them at some point just to see if they hold up at all. But the second book just has so much I feel like could have been cut, and maybe I wouldn't feel that on a reread. Interesting to me though is that Aragon book. It's a different topic, but the first Aragon book was self-published, and it was like the early 2000s, I think. And I was I mean, self-publishing is rather big now. Has gotten a lot bigger in the last 10
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, but he also did it in a way that's a lot different than what most people would do these days.
Hmm.
Because as I remember correctly, his family helped him print a
Yeah.
bunch of their own
Yeah.
copies, and then he literally went around to all the local bookstores and said, "Hey, would you be willing to, sell 20 copies of my book? I'll sell them to you for this amount of money." And he ended up selling enough copies that it got the interest of people in the publishing industry going, "Who's this dude over here selling like 20,000 copies of this fantasy novel over on the northwest coast of the United States," or wherever it was?
Hmm.
That's a very rough approximation of what I remember happening. I don't know if exactly. I'm sure there's a wiki page somewhere for Christopher. What is his name? Nalini or something? I forget.
Paolini. Yeah.
Paolini. I'm sure there's a wiki page that explains all of it, but I do vaguely remember that what he did was they printed them on their own and then went and just were selling them at local bookstores. But because it had its, ISBN and everything else, all that stuff is being tracked for sales purposes, and it was selling enough copies that somebody went, "What is this fantasy novel that's making all this money over here and selling
Hmm.
all these copies?" And that got him his first publishing deal. So some of it was, yeah, it's a good for a like 14-year-old kid or whatever he was when he wrote that. It's definitely a novel written by a 14-year-old kid. Like
Yeah.
and it's definitely a first time novel. Just as much as I can say about some of my early work, I can look at it and go, "Oh yeah, that was a long time ago before I knew about this, that, and the other."
Right. Yeah.
Um, I can also say the same thing for like I like this guy called Stephen R. Lawhead, who people haven't read a lot of, and he's another Christian author who's done some, but it's like C.S. Lewis. His works are influenced by his religion. Sorry, like
Hmm.
Tolkien, influenced by his religion, but not overtly so like C.S. Lewis. But like
Hmm.
I reviewed his Celtic trilogy, the Endless Knot series, and he wrote some amazing, this one series called the Pendragon series, which is like his take on the Arthurian legends and how Merlin and is all their island of Atlantis and all this cool stuff. But if you go back and read like his debut novel, which is called Dream Thief, it was this really hard to swallow, overly religious science fiction story about a space station and dreams and religion, and it was just like, it's cringy. It's really hard to read when you then go back and read his later work, but it was also his debut novel. So it was like, you can watch the evolution of him through books over the years. But self-publishing these days is a lot different than it was back then, because I don't even know. You could definitely do the Christopher Polling thing, and like if you wanted to spend the money to publish, and then drive around. The problem though is getting the bookstores to be willing to buy those books off of you. You would have to be willing to sell them for like the cost. You would have to be willing to sell them for next to no profit, because bookshelf space is limited, and they've already got existing deals with all of these other publishing houses. It's really hard to get your books in, and I feel like these days anybody with the patience, it's time, dedication, all that good stuff, but anybody who has the time and willingness and to go out there and just build up their own audience through social media and Patreon and YouTube and everything else, it might take 2-3 years, but anybody who's willing to do that can build up an audience who's willing to at least give you a side hustle that's going to pay you a few $1,000s a year. And if that's all you ever want to have it be, then that's what it can be. But if you keep pushing at it, I don't know of anybody out of all the people I know in my circle, I don't know of anyone who hasn't had it become their full-time job if they wanted it to be. It has taken different lengths of time. It's taken 5 to 7 years sometimes for people, but everybody I know who's doing things creatively in their lives, within 5 to 7 years, they've been able to do that full time. It's just a matter of, you just got to put in the time every single day, day in, day out, and you can't ever stop. And if you're willing to do that, then every month you get more followers and you get more people and you get more patrons and you get more sales and you get more pre-orders and you get more this, that, or the other. And, not to single you out, but you're a good example of this, because you're someone who's been here since my brother and I first started doing something that wasn't related to my travel work. Like, right? Because everything I did before 2014 was in the travel space. And I had built up a big following over the course of I started my travel blog in 2011. I was still a contract writer up until 2011. 2011, I started my travel blog. I was full-time on my travel blog by 2013. So 2 years, basically. It took me 2 years. But I came in at the self-publishing of like how to make a living online, traveling the world and being a writer at the beginning, before there was all these travel bloggers who were like, I'm going to sell my shit and go abroad and go live in Bangkok. So I had this, it's called the Expat Guidebook, and I came out with that in 2012, and it sold $50,000 worth of copies within the first year. And so it was like, well, I'm good. I only need like 10 grand a year to live off of in Mexico. So I just made 5 years of my living expenses off of a single book. And that allowed me to then write other books. And then it was just, I was able to build up an audience with that. Right place, right time, somewhat of a thing. But then starting to move over into fantasy and game development and stuff, fantasy and science fiction in 2014, I had to start over, because I didn't have that many people. Only a handful of people followed me over from the other, because that was travel related, and they didn't necessarily have gaming and everything else. But you're the perfect example of someone who came across it in 2014 and has just followed along despite the ups and downs of changing IPs and different projects and everything else. And along the way, we've gathered up more people, and we've got folks like Rack. I've been playing games with Rack. I don't know if you know who Rack is, but he's in our Discord. I've been playing games with Rack for like 6 years now. EverQuest, Lord of the Rings Online, things of that nature. Guys like Nathan, who I met, like 2 years ago. Simmerg I've known because he was originally an affiliate for Saga of Lucimia, who I brought on board to be a streamer for that project, and then I became part of his show doing the podcast with him. And that is just the nature. And my brother and I have talked about this a lot too. Like we looked at, even though we're not part of what they're doing with that game anymore with Stormhaven Studios, with their game. If you look at where we started in 2014 versus where we were in the beginning of 2020, where I had just signed the paperwork with Bob Brown from Blizzard, that was almost 7-year journey of going from two brothers working on a project to being, 20 people on a team, raising a whole bunch of money from investors and everything else. And the same thing with what we're doing with Weave in the Void right now is just, we had to start that. We started that from scratch in March of 2021. And now we've got it's a slow start, but we got patron subscribers, we have Twitch subscribers, we have the YouTube, we have everything else. We have a gaming community. It's definitely every month we see growth. So if you track that line of growth, no matter what you want to publish, this is the note I wanted to bring up. Sorry, was that in terms of publishing works, and whether it's painting, art, painting, writing, music, anything else, everybody can self-publish these days. There's millions of platforms to do it on. If you're going to do podcasting or music, you do Spotify, Bandcamp. You've got social media out the wazoo. You get self-publish through Lulu, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, like all these different places. All you have to do is just be willing to do the time and put it in and build an audience, and you can eventually find an audience for your platform. Not an audience for your platform, that sounded in reverse. You can find a platform for your audience and find an audience that's going to consume your content. That's not the hard part. The hard part is it's taking me 2 years and I only have, I've only sold $500 worth of stuff. Is it still worth pursuing at this point? Because not everyone's going to make it at the 2-year mark. Some people might need 5 years. Some people might need 7 years. And do you have a spouse that's willing to support your broke ass all that time? Or, do you got to go get a real job? And I think it's what a lot of writers do anyways. They have a spouse, or they have I think Sanderson was a hotel clerk at nights, wasn't he? That's why he took that job, was that
he could write.
He could write without there being a lot of customers bothering him. That's a great solution, to find a job that pays your bills while also giving you the time that you need to write your books or to do whatever it is that you're working on creatively. Although I always come back to, we were talking about this, I think pre-show, those books that you have right there, those were print on demand from Amazon, and I'm not entirely happy with the covers, but it's print on demand. What are you going to do? The only way you're going to get high quality stock is if you go through a traditional publisher. But it's the bookshelf situation. The bookshelf scenario is the same scenario that publishing houses face, where they're getting millions of submissions every year from people who write absolute drivel. And I don't want to think about being an agent. I remember before I published Echoes of the Past, before I decided to self-publish that, I did attempt to go through agents. It took me, I spent 6 months sending to agents, and I got several partial manuscript requests. I got several full manuscript requests, and it was taking so long. It was obvious that I did not have a golden goose unicorn. That's fine. Not everyone's going to have Harry Potter or Game of Thrones. You know what I mean? Like, that's the 1%. So if you're part of the 99%, are you going to spend 18 months sending that out to agents while you're working on book 2? And I said, hell no, because I know for a fact that we already have a built-in audience from the social media that we've been building up for the game, that I can just go ahead and sell this through our existing audience, and we'll sell X amount of copies. And we did. And having sold previously tens of thousands of dollars of copies of my own books since all the way back in 2013, I've never seen a need to go through traditional publishers. That's not to say I wouldn't like to. I wouldn't mind getting something traditionally published at some point, but I also don't have the patience to wait 2, 3, 4 years to get a paycheck for something when I know that I can go out and get paid within 4 months after I wrote something. I should be able to recoup within a year at the least. I should be able to recoup my cost in terms of labor and everything else by selling to my existing audience, or people I've never met yet who haven't yet found the YouTube, or they didn't know that I write books, or they didn't know that we're making a video game, like all this other stuff. Which is why I want to spin this back around to something we talked about at the very beginning of the episode. making your first sale, congratulations, starting point, and just consider that like you can either look at it as the beginning of the uphill grind, or you can look at it as the beginning of the downhill slope. Like it just depends on your point of view. Like that's always going to depend on the person how they view that, because the hard work is never going to stop unless you're lucky enough to become one of the 1% who write something good enough or get lucky enough to find an agent who can sell your stuff. Because some of it's luck and some of it's talent. Like, Sanderson is a good example of someone who's really, really good, but also was right place at the right time to be able to get Robert Jordan, to be able to finish Robert Jordan's series, which catapulted him into superstardom, which has then allowed him to go off and do all these other amazing things. Brandon Sanderson is not the role model everyone should be looking at. That is a unicorn. That is it's a 1 in a million thing. You should be looking at people like C.J. Sherry or Raymond Feist, or guys like Elie Modisette Jr., who wrote the Chaos Saga War series. That is a dude who has been, I think he's still around. He's probably an older gentleman now, but like he has been writing books for Baen for like, I think it's Baen, his main publisher, like 40 years, and not a lot of bestsellers in there, but he consistently writes several novels every single year. Not everyone's going to be a unicorn. Some people are going to just be making $40,000-$50,000 a year as a writer. It is what it is.
Yeah, and that's, in a lot of cases, that's okay. I mean, I saw a tweet from DJ Butler, who I talked to last time I talked to an author, and he was saying that he made a tweet that is like, if I ever became popular, like actually popular, like big, like Martin or someone else like that, he said like he'd probably die from the irony alone. Because he's just like, because I'm not writing stuff like that. So
no, I mean, so you're not. I mean, I'm happy to admit that my stuff is genre fair. Like Saga of Lucimia has influences from, Echoes of the Past has influences from Tad Williams, Robert Jordan, Raymond Feist, right? And then what I'm working on with The Weave of the Void is very much Weiss and Hickman. It's very much Dragonlance is where I got the inspiration for that. And so I'm not creating groundbreaking magic systems like Sanderson is. And if you look at the magic system I have in The Weave in the Void, there's a lot of similarities to the magic system from Saga of Lucimia. Like it's their elemental magic. We're talking about the weaves and the strands and other stuff, and like that in and of itself is influenced by Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time. So I mean, I know for a fact that I'm not writing groundbreaking stuff that would become bestsellers because it's unique and magical. But I also know that I'm writing entertaining stuff that some people like, and that's enough for me. It doesn't have to be bestseller. As long as it makes me a living, that's really what I'm focused on. And so far, I've been able to make a living as a writer since 2008. So I'd say some years have been better than others, but hey, it's a little interspersed with game dev these days, but because literally all I do anymore is I work on the serialized chapters, and then I work on the tabletop book, which is a combination of boring mechanics and module stuff, which is storyline and storytelling, and quests and everything else. But then I'm also writing all of the dialogue and descriptions and everything else for the point and click game, which is more boring. Like, this is what the signpost says, and this is the description of the NPC, and this is the description of the plants. But then I'm also writing the quests for that, which is very much like writing a novel again, except you're doing it in quest format with different branches of dialogue and stuff. So, but that's all writing. Like, it's all, at the end of the day, it all is writing. So I've been able to, I can at least say I've been making a living doing writing stuff since I made that first $15 sale, which was not a lot of money back then, but hey, it was the start of a, thankfully, career that has lasted me now. And it's a hell of a lot funner than what I used to do, which was ceramic tile and natural stone for 20 years as a third generation contractor. I do not miss having to, break my back and physically die to make money. Now I just have cranky old man arthritis hands and bloodshot eyes from too many years staring at a computer screen.
Definitely. But that's That's nice. I haven't right. And it was Medallions was your first then?
That was the first professional sale. The second thing I did after that was I found work on a computer game called, I don't remember the name of the computer game now. I've got it in my resume somewhere. The company was called Black Sheep Entertainment. I remember that. Black Sheep Entertainment, and it was a kids game, and they needed a quest writer, and so I started off doing quest writing, and it paid crap. It was like $10 a month but it wasn't a lot of work. It was like maybe 5 hours of work a month, but I only got paid like $10 for that. So it's way less than minimum wage, but I got credit. I got credit on an independent game title. And then they hired me on as an editor. I got slightly more, and I got another credit. And that led me to writing game guides for Killer Guides, which at the time Lord of the Rings Online I'd been playing that, so they needed game guide authors. So I did those like no paying jobs for like 2-3 months, and then I was able to get that first big paying gig. I wrote the game guides. I did 2 Lotro guides and an EverQuest 2 guide for them, and those initially only paid $600 up front. But then if they maintained a certain standard rating on the website, I got a commission based on was it copper, silver, gold, that type of thing. And I had gold rated for like 10 or 12 months. So I ended up making like $2,500 a month in commission from the sales of those guidebooks. And then I got very lucky, and I found a lady out of Australia who was doing home improvement websites. And I grew up in construction. So I was like, she paid like $3,000 a month to write websites for like how to install cabinets and how to change plumbing. And I was like, I can write that in my sleep. So then I was doing that and selling short stories and everything. So it just kind of migrated from there. Yeah.
That's cool.
Long time ago. Long time ago.
That's really cool. It's actually really inspiring. Maybe it'll inspire someone who's watching this. Definitely inspired me some. It was always nice, over the years, just to hear more about like how you you make
everybody can take different paths these days.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful thing. Like there's not just one way to do it. So
Mm-hmm.
I definitely took a weird path. Mine was definitely different than a lot of people.
Well, that's okay. So we should probably I have to get going myself actually. So we'll probably end it here. But just want to thank you, Tim, again for coming on and chatting. And
I'm glad to be here. I appreciate. By the way, I will say this for the record. Thanks for following along for so long through all the ups and downs, because I know the Saga of Lucimia stuff got a little crazy there for a little while, but you stuck it out, and I appreciate that. So thanks, and I'm glad to be here. I'm also glad to see that your YouTube channel is growing and everything else, because I remember back in the day it was only the Forgotten Realms stuff, and then you started it in the BookTube, and it was like, oh yeah, now I feel shitty because I don't read anymore. And that you were literally the reason I went and bought this stupid thing, because my brother had been telling me for like 2 years, you got to go get a Kindle, and I'm like, I don't read that much anymore. And then Liam started his YouTube channel, and I started feeling really guilty about not reading anymore. And I went, you know what? I got to change that. So kudos, good sir, because you got me back into reading again.
Okay. Well, I wasn't trying to make you feel guilty, but I'm glad that that worked out at least.
It did work.
Anyways, but yeah, thanks for joining. I'm sure we'll talk again at some point.
Yep.
Again, you can find Tim right now, Weaving the Void. Go to his Patreon. I'll link that down below. And so, anyways, we'll catch you next time.